granted?
Because she's a foreign minister. But it does seem quite extraordinary that this was done at the point in time when it was done, given that the process had already started and that the Director of Public Prosecutions would have had to have been sure that there was sufficient evidence.
So is there anything that can be done now, or is this a checkmate, as it were? You said there was a sleight of hand. Have they won, as it were, or is there still something that can be done under the legal system as it stands?
Oh, it's far from being a checkmate. As Bill said, it makes it somewhat more difficult. Although, let's be aware, there'd only been 2 of these arrest warrants, as far as we're aware, issued in the last decade. They were issued by a court. It's not as if this was anyone else making it up. The court had to consider the evidence. There was already a lot of guarantees in place. On one hand, though, it doesn't deal with the underlying problem of English prosecution, is that for these very serious offences, which includes war crimes, but includes other international crimes like crimes against humanity and torture under different laws, the final decision on prosecution in England and Wales remains with the Attorney General, who remains a member of the government. So when it becomes a political decision, whether of a foreign dignitary or of persons within the United Kingdom, including British politicians and others, then it's going to be very difficult to get that past the hurdle of the Attorney General. And that, for us at least, remains the main problem with British prosecutions.
Well, if we come to Dawood Abdullah, what does the Middle East Monitor make of this situation?
Well, we think this is an utter disgrace on the part of the British government because what it did, Tzipi Livni is not a minister of government. She is simply the opposition leader. And therefore, what they did, they offered retrospective immunity to her to come into the United Kingdom. But it should be noted that the Director of Public Prosecution said there was not a lack of evidence. However, she was on a special mission, and this is why the immunity was granted. Now, the fact is, Britain is obliged to pursue these criminals wherever the crime was committed and by whomever committed these crimes. So, and it is obliged to uphold and to ensure the convention is respected. So it is in flagrant breach of its treaty obligations, and we think this is an undermining of the British judiciary, not least because what will happen in future is that decisions will be slower and it will be subject to political interference.
Well, we have Professor of Law with us here. You just heard that. Well, the fact is, Livni is not a current serving foreign minister. It is rather strange to grant retrospective immunity. And is that even possible? Is that legally something that can be done?
It's been done. I hope the legality of it will be challenged because it seems to me to be extremely dubious. I think it's also worth at this point remembering that a few years ago in 2005, General Almog, an Israeli general against whom there was a tremendous amount of evidence for demolishing over 50 homes in the Rafah refugee camp in Gaza, an arrest warrant was actually issued for him, and in fact he landed in Britain. The warrant was issued by District Judge Magistrate Timothy Workman, who would have considered the evidence extremely carefully before issuing the warrant. What happened is that General Almog was somehow tipped off, and the police were not prepared to go onto the El Al plane. It was not Israeli territory, but they were frightened there would be armed guards on the plane. So General Almog was able to fly back to Israel. But that's why Israeli officials have been so nervous. And the current
because
case...
it makes it very politically difficult, and you have these potentially embarrassing situations, which it seems this government has now neatly helped to sidestep for them. This case seems to be kind of doubly controversial in the sense that we'd have also somebody like Riyad Saleh for 3 months now in prison, challenging and appealing the fact he's been detained, a Palestinian activist. Is this a case of double standards, or is this that the law is just being applied in this way?
The double standards come with the approach of the government, and we've seen this in different parts of the world as well. Universal jurisdiction is seen in some countries as a fine thing when you're dealing with uncontroversial countries like Rwanda. there's been quite a few Rwandese who've been prosecuted in different countries under it. Once you start challenging powerful states, not just Israel, the United States and China, there becomes a backlash. So we've seen the universal jurisdiction law in Belgium, which was very powerful, being greatly watered down. We've seen major challenges to the universal jurisdiction law in Spain once they started investigating American officials and Chinese. So we see that the universal jurisdiction law, when it's in the hands of independent judges and prosecutors, is powerful, but there will always be a backlash from powerful.
So are we still the law of the jungle? If you're strong, it's okay, and if you're weak, tough?
No, I think we've moved on quite a bit. I mean, the seminal case was 10 years ago of Augusto Pinochet in the UK, arrested under a request for extradition from Spain. He also tried one of these arguments that he had some form of continuing immunity as a former president, and that was rejected then. So that, again, those sort of arguments should be rejected now. What we need to do is start to actually look at the evidence. The other powerful player on this is the International Criminal Court, which is getting wider and wider jurisdiction. And then we've seen that if Palestine is recognized as a state, it said it will ratify the ICC, which will give that jurisdiction over crimes committed on the territory.
Well, if I can come back to Dawood, what's the next step then? This was a powerful tool to at least embarrass Israeli officials, and it seems that it's been somewhat watered down, but perhaps not completely eliminated.
Yes, the efforts to prosecute suspects will continue. As you rightly pointed out, it will become difficult, but not impossible, because the evidence is so overwhelming. It would be hard for anyone, to be committed to the due process and absolve or exonerate these individuals. Let it be recalled here that these laws were instituted following the atrocities of the 1939-45 war, in which so many millions of Jews were killed. There was no crimes against humanity or war crimes on the statutes before then. And this category of law was created specifically as a result of what happened during that war. And now the survivors of the victims, you see, have abused the law in order to gain immunity from prosecution.
From your point of view, what do you think the next steps could be? Do you think that an appeal is possible? Do you think a retrospective appeal in the case of this particular visit would have some merit?
No, I think that what has to be extremely clear here is that previously it was a highly experienced judge who had to review the evidence to see if there were grounds for a warrant. Now there's the additional step that you have to have the Director of Public Prosecutions. And
if you can explain to our viewers what the different role is. As a QC, is he part of the judiciary or is it political position?
No, he's a public law officer. So he's somebody who's been appointed to be the head of the prosecution service. So an extremely important person. So it means that not only a judge, but the Director of Public Prosecutions, first of all, has to screen the case. So
presumably, if the evidence is strong, that
yes,
should not be a problem.
If the evidence was
become
very
a
strong,
barrier?
yes, if the evidence was very strong and he refused, then that refusal could be challenged in the courts. What is so bad in this case is that the government doesn't even allow him to carry out the function which he was only given on the 15th of September, but instead goes in for this extremely unusual, I don't know if it's unprecedented, but extremely unusual move to stop the whole thing. So I sincerely hope that's going to be challenged. I'm actually active with lawyers for Palestinian human rights who got the warrant against General Almog,
right,
and were instrumental in trying to get the warrant on this occasion. And so far as we're concerned, I'm sure we are going to work 10 times as hard in order to ensure that the system is made to work. It's something extremely serious. As I said, it's on the books here since 1957. The number of times that anybody has been prosecuted is just about nil. And it's about time, honestly, when you have such serious crimes being committed.
Of course, it can be quite demoralising for victims in this case. Think that every time they have some tool that somehow it's taken away, and you get countries like Britain coming in, stepping in to prevent justice being done. That
we know that this can be a long haul, that Pinochet was only prosecuted years after his time in office. In fact, he only went to court a couple of times. But even that was seen as a form of victory in terms of accountability. It's just making people aware. There's a couple of other points just to make on this as well, is that these are universal rules. They're there to protect everyone. So in terms of the Middle East conflict, they prohibit all forms of indiscriminate attack. Those are all war crimes, whether it's against Israelis in the form of rockets as well, any attacks on Palestinians in Gaza. The other key area is that certainly under the International Criminal Court, the transfer of civilian population into an occupied territory is a war crime as well, i.e. the settlements. So there'll be quite a lot of people at risk when those acts that law comes into force.
Can you understand the anger, not just in Britain, at how Britain itself is being drawn into this more and more by these kind of actions by politicians, but around the world where they see a double standard, whether it's the United Nations resolutions not being implemented once they've even actually been passed, and laws being applied so selectively?
I should also say that I'm actually opposed to intervention. So if it's a question of intervening in another country, I'm actually against that, and I'm increasingly against that because of what's been happening. But when you have a universal jurisdiction law, which says that when you have people who have committed extremely serious crimes and there's good evidence against them, and they should be prosecuted wherever they're to be found, that is not intervention. I think that is making the criminal law work in relation to everybody without exception.
And do you yourself come under any kind of pressure having this kind of stance?
Well, I hope there are more and more of us. We clearly have a government which finds it more comfortable and convenient to be in cahoots with all kinds of regimes around the world. And we have all kinds of evidence of that coming out day by day with this government. I hope, that it's going to be possible to make life uncomfortable for them.
Well, Dawood Abdullah, what's the next steps as far as Middle East monitoring this particular case?
Well, as I said, we will continue to campaign and to draw to the public attention that our government intervened militarily in Libya and has supported a resolution in Syria in the Security Council on the basis that it carried out crimes against the civilian population. So what happened in Gaza is no different. And we think our government, the time has come to abandon these policies of double standards and to adhere to the law equally and fairly.
In terms of Human Rights Watch, are you getting directly involved in this, or are you helping just in terms of keeping people informed about what's going on?
Our main role is to keep people informed about what has happened. First of all, we documented the war crimes committed by both sides, including by the Israelis, in Operation Cast Lead, and since then. But also we promote universal justice around the world for these clear international crimes. And the critical issue in the United Kingdom is they need to start with justice at home. And one example we've just seen is the growing evidence of the scale of war crimes that were committed by British forces in Iraq. And not one senior person has ever been investigated, let alone prosecuted for that. So that's something where they could start. And that's much more easy and straightforward, it would seem, than someone visiting. The fact that no one is being prosecuted there will be something that the authorities could easily fix.
Because, of course, the moral authority of our country comes very much into question. One of the reasons they give for intervening around the world is that we're trying to promote values of democracy, human rights and the rule of law.
Yes, and just to carry on from what Clive was just saying, the Iraq intervention, the invasion and occupation, was illegal in international law. That is absolutely clear, and the current inquiry doesn't cast any doubt on that. There's a very strong case for prosecuting very senior British government officials for war crimes committed during the invasion and occupation. And so far, sadly, the International Criminal Court has refused to take that up. Now,
on what basis? Because on the one hand, you're saying there's a strong legal case. The impression most people have it was a grey area and there were different interpretations. But you just said here in this programme it was clear breach of international law.
Yes.
And on what grounds is the ICC not allowing a hearing on this?